What does it do, YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of Scotty Says. I am your host, and welcome to episode 116. 116, my folks. And first and foremost, Happy New Year. Welcome to the Deuce 5, the Deuce and a Quarter. Ah, yes. And of course, New Year brings about time for reflection, thinking about improvements upon the past, and moving forward with new resolve and resolution. And in that vein, well, I don't typically make New Year's resolutions per se, but one I'd like to attempt, I think, for the new year is to be less loquacious and to employ concise brevity with the Scotty Says offerings moving forward. So let's see how we do. I mean, we've got so much to get to. Let's get right to it. And thinking about past episodes, well, you know, episode 116 episodes ago was the NFL 2024 season opening episode from Scotty Says, and I featured my predictions for the 2024 NFL season. And so this season ending episode gives a perfect opportunity for me to go back and share with you how I did with my predictions. And you already know I did fairly well, huh? But we'll get to that. And it also allows time for reflection on what has happened leading up to this point. And I do feel a sense of excitement, anticipation as the Rams prepare for a postseason run, hopefully a run versus a one and done. And now we know the Rams will be playing the Minnesota Vikings at the Palace in Inglewood on the last Monday night football game of the season, postseason edition. And I tell you what, I'm looking forward to it, and I feel a sense of optimism. And so first and foremost, I just want to again congratulate the team, starting with the coach himself, McGenius, because to come from 1-4 to end up, and they ended up 10-7. We'll take a brief cursory look at this last game against Seattle, but it was essentially meaningless. McGenius rested majority of his starters, and you see why now, for good reason, why that was a good move to make. You see what happened with Deuce's Blake Corum, and so it's awful, but that's the game of professional football. And so, you know, get well soon, Deuces, and get back out there next season. But he is done for the season. No postseason run for Deuces. Broken forearm. But that's why, if you can rest your starters in a final game, you don't need to go chasing numbers and chasing waterfalls and chasing after wins. If it's locked up, let them sit down. And so that's what this game was for the Rams, and what it was also for a team like Seattle, who was eliminated. It was an opportunity for Geno to pad some stats and hit some incentives. And I understand Geno made a cool extra $6 extra milli in that game against the Rams by hitting those certain contractual benchmarks. And so that's a pretty good day at the office, isn't it? Pretty nice 3 hours work, paycheck plus a $6 million bonus. Go ahead on, Geno. But let's focus on winning teams and playoff-bound teams in this episode, shall we? And so now, as I say, we know that the Rams will face the Minnesota Vikings. And I'll tell you what now. After what I saw against, put 'em up, the Lions. Minnesota, they look ripe for the picking, don't they? They look ready to be a one-and-doner. And I can't get that first Rams-Minnesota meeting at the Palace several weeks back. I can't unsee that. I can't get that out of my mind. And so I just can't help but feel that the Rams have the upper hand when it comes to this first round playoff matchup. And so I am expecting the Rams, even though they are underdogs at home, I'm expecting them to upset many. And so we'll get to the specifics of the past Minnesota game and the upcoming Minnesota game in just a bit. But to go from 1-4 to 10-7, and to have essentially done the same thing the year before, to start 3-6 the year before and then finish 10-7, and then this season to start 1-4 and then end up 10-7. That's no small feat. And I'll tell you what, I thought the Rams were cooked at 1-4 because they were a miserable looking 1-4. They were a putrid looking 1-4. And so, hey, all credit where credit is due. McGenius and the team, they were able to turn it around and go on a win streak, and the Rams have won 5 in a row. Now, they haven't been pretty, but as we have well established, all dubs are beautiful, right? All dubs are 10s. We've established that. So the fact that they're a little homely, several of them, we're not going to let that stand in the way. But I cannot help but to also bring you the real, because that's what we do here on the outskirts. We broadcast the real. You know this. And so the reality, though, for the Rams, statistically, when we look at the numbers, and we'll break down the numbers when we project into the playoffs, the Rams have a very poor statistical bearing. You juxtapose them to the other playoff teams. As you know, there are 14 playoff teams, and we'll juxtapose where the Rams sit versus the other 13, and specifically versus the other 6 in the NFC. We'll get there in just a bit. But with the mindset of keeping my New Year's resolution on track, let's get right to it, the meat of the episode. Now, we're not going to give you a game analysis of this past game without the starters, and we'll save that kind of business for this first round playoff game. But we will take a cursory glance at the numbers and apply the principle just for kicks and giggles. So let's do that. Now, the Rams had more total yards, more passing yards, but less rushing yards. And just as a side note, Coach McGenius allowed his offensive coordinator, who never calls plays, he allowed him for the second time to call the plays for this game against the Seahawks. And if you recall, LaFleur, who called the plays last year against them damn Niners, when they whooped LaFleur called the plays this time. But unlike last year, and honestly, it made me chuckle. I saw LaFleur. He had a little pregame press conference, and he talked about calling the plays that one game last year for the Rams against them damn Niners. And he said he didn't realize until later when he looked at the numbers that he had called so many run plays for the Wentzer, for Carson Wentz. It turned out it was the most run plays in Carson Wentz's career, and he didn't realize he had run him that hard. Well, it was a beautiful strategy, but I knew it had to be something wrong. There was a fly in the soup, because I knew it couldn't have been McWonder doing all those quarterback runs. And it wasn't. Well, it looked like LaFleur decided to reverse his tendencies from the previous opportunity he had to call plays with this game, where he went heavy with Jimmy G and the pass game. And so I hope that that's not an omen. I'm pretty much willing to chuck these numbers out, with the understanding that this was sort of a throwaway game. But keep in mind, my folks, the Rams were on a 5-game winning streak. 4 games in a row. The first 4 in the streak, they used my 25-30 principle to perfection, and it worked for them. It won for them, as I knew it would, as I promised it would. But that 5th game that they won in a row, that game, McWender strayed away from the principle. He was out of compliance, and though they still won that game against the Cardinals, it was shaky. They were kind of wheezing down the stretch. Remember at the end of that game, why Kyler Murray, the diminutive one, had a pass go off the helmet of his receiver in the end zone with the game-winning touchdown with only seconds left to play. The Rams were about to lose that game, but my point is only the trend has been going in the wrong direction for the Rams. They are starting to go back, revert, Motown, backslide, back to that pass-heavy, out-of-balance offense. And that's not what we need to see, Coach. That is a recipe to be a one-and-doneer your damn self. And so kudos and congratulations are most definitely in order for the coach to be able to lead that team from 1-4 to 10-7 and a division title, to be able to lead that team last year from 3-6 to 10-7 in a wild card. You deserve credit, but the fly in the soup is your tendencies. The Book of McWonder, we've talked about it at length. Those tendencies will lead to your demise unless you take steps to restrain the malevolent one, unless you take steps to remain in balance. Unless you follow the 25-30 principle, you put yourself at risk. Now, Kevin O'Connell is off the McWonder tree. And he very well may be out of balance on both metrics his own self. So it could be, very well may be, that whether you follow the principle to the letter or not, you may still be able to get away with a playoff win. That's what we saw in that first game against Minnesota at the Palace. Neither coach was in compliance with the 25-30 principle. The Rams outplayed them, though. Looked more energetic. And in the end, the Rams held on. Remember the face mask that wasn't called in the end zone? And the Rams held on and won that game. But you give yourself a much stronger position, a higher degree of likelihood by far, by simply following the metrics of the 25-30 principle. And you know, my folks, we'll be back on the other side of the Monday night Minnesota game. And we will, in fact, chop it up and apply the principle and see how he did. But in this past game against Seattle, let's just get right to the numbers now. Let's apply the principle. Well, Geno, the aforementioned Geno Smith, the $6 million bonus man. Well, 20 of 27, 223 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, good game. He was sacked twice. That's a grand total of 29 dropbacks, 29 passes. That's a check on the pass side. Rushing, Charbonnet, 14 carries. McIntosh had 7, Smith and Jigba had 1, and Geno had 24. So they just missed. They were a tick short of that magical number. The 25-30 principle stipulates you must have a minimum of 25 design run plays, and they had 24 if you include Geno's 2 runs. So they were short there, but their balance differential was a -5. Keep that in mind. Let's look at the Rams, who were the losers in this case. Jimmy G, Garoppolo, the porn star lover. Jimmy G, or should I call him Jimmy P? He had, let me see, 27 of 41 for 27 of 41 for 334 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a poltergeist strike. Plus, Jimmy G was sacked 3 times. That's a total of 44 dropbacks. 44 dropbacks. That's a big red X for LaFleur. And the Rams on the pass side. What about rushing? Well, we know what happened with Deuces, unfortunately. He only had 2 carries before he had to leave the game. Ronnie Rivers filled in. He's going to be your backup running back by all accounts. He had 12 totes, 4 yards a pop, 12 for 48, but he only had 12. Whittington had a couple. And the X-Man, he had a couple. But in the end, they only had 21 carries. So that's 2 red X's on the Rams side, and that's a -24 balance differential. See, these are the kind of numbers that's going to put an L on your head, and that's what happened. So they missed both metrics of the principle and had a -24 balance differential. Meanwhile, Seattle, they hit 1 metric and missed 1, and their balance differential was only a -5. And they won. So the principle once again holds true. It's the golden rule of football, if I do say so myself. Okay, so enough said about that pass game. It was a throwaway game. Let's look forward towards Minnesota. Now, I mentioned I did an episode midway through the season. It was a double episode, in fact. This is episode 116. Well, one episode in the course of this season between 100 and 116 was a double episode, and that was the Raiders and Minnesota. It was a double episode, and in that episode, I recall how much energy the Rams had and how they really came out and put a nice little spanking on Minnesota. And I was impressed by that victory. And I thought, now, if you play this way with this kind of energy, you have a good chance of starting to turn things around. And that's exactly what happened. And so in that first game, there were game balls for the victors, game balls, and the game balls, the 3 of them went to Matty from the D, Stafford, Kyron Williams, and Puka Nacua. And so that lets you know right there, your 3 stars on offense got game balls. You're probably going to have, when the 3 of these guys are all playing on a high level, you're probably going to have a very good outcome. And that's what that scenario was. So let's look at the numbers. Let's apply the principle to that first Minnesota-LA game at the Palace in Inglewood. Well, Matty from the D was 25 of 34, so he was a few ticks over the threshold. They missed the metric by a little bit, but he did have 4 touchdowns that game. And do you remember that game? That was the game where one of the touchdowns was Matty back in the pocket, and the pocket collapses and the rush gets to him and he ducks under the rush and comes out the other side, and then he high steps and throws touchdown. Remember that? That was that Minnesota game. So your 3 offensive stars played well in that first game, and I'm expecting to see that, a version of that, in this game coming up on Monday night as well. But here's the thing. Though the Rams missed the first metric by a bit on runs, Coach McGenius ran the ball a total of 29 times. That's what I'm talking about. 29 runs for the Rams. And so their balance differential was just a -5. And that'll get you a dub even if you don't hit both metrics. And that's exactly what happened. Now, what did Kevin O'Connell, what did the McWonder protege do in that first game? Well, his quarterback, Sam Darnold, 28 pass attempts. That's within the green light district. That's how you hit it. 28 pass attempts, check. What about runs for Minnie? 19 total runs. Nah, Minnie, you're short. You're short. And so Minnie is appropriate for them. They were short. They were a mini. And they had a -9 balance differential to McWonder's -5. You see? And so the 25-30 principle held up in that game as well, as it always does, seemingly. Golden, the new golden rule. Well, it held up in that game as well. And so what I want to encourage the coach of the Rams, I want to exhort him. I want to use the strongest possible language to compel him to employ the 25-30 principle against Minnesota, and you will advance. It's that simple. Do otherwise, and then things go into flux. You dig? So we'll see how it plays out. Now, speaking about the upcoming playoff game, well, let's talk about the lineup. Well, here's the thing. Everybody is expected to be available, including Havenstein, who sat out this past game among many other starters. Havenstein's been out a couple games now. Havenstein is important because you don't want no-go boom anchoring any part of your line if you can avoid it in the postseason. And so it is fully expected that the starting lineup on offense for the LA Rams will be from left to right on the O-line: Alaric Jackson, Steve Avila, Bo Limmer, Kevin Dotson, Rob Havenstein. Your starting tight end will be Higbee, the Hig Man, Big Hig, and your wide receiver Brew, your wide receiver Stu. In 11 personnel will be the Puka Soup, the DeMarcus Robinson, Puka Nacua, and Super Cooper Kupp. That will be your starting lineup on offense with, of course, your mainstays, Matty from the D and K. Will in the backfield. And so, enough said there. And so let's get to the predictions portion of the episode. First of all, I want to start with how did I do with my initial season projections from episode 116 episodes ago. How did I do? Well, let's just start with where I missed. I'll tell you right now where I missed. I only missed, in terms of playoff teams, 3 teams in the AFC. I predicted that Miami would win the division over Buffalo and that Buffalo would be the wild card. That was my biggest miss, maybe my second biggest miss of the season, because Miami didn't even make the playoffs. They're below 500 and Buffalo looks like one of the best teams in the NFL. So missed that one big time. But I had Buffalo as my second place team in the AFC East, and I predicted that they would get into the tournament as a wild card team, and they are in the tournament. So I just missed that one. And staying in the AFC East, I just have to point out a lot of the experts, you know who I'm talking about, a lot of them had the New York Jets, Jets, stink, stank, stunk, they had them as division winners in the AFC East. They predicted that the Jets and Covington would be in the playoffs, and I told you in episode 100 to start the season, the end of August or beginning of September, I told you the Jets would not make the playoffs. I told you, and they did not, and you know they did not. And so I will take my credit there as well. Let's look at the AFC North. Well, I predicted Baltimore would win that division, and they did. And I also predicted Cincinnati would fall off, and they did. And I also predicted that Pittsburgh could very well get a wild card, and they did. Let's talk about the AFC South. I predicted Houston would win the division, and they did. Let's talk about my miss here, though. I thought Indy would get a wild card spot, and they did not. And so that was a miss on my part. But I told you Jacksonville was fraudulent, and they'd be awful, and they were. And I told you Tennessee would be at the bottom, and they are the number one pick in the draft at the bottom. So I feel justified on those picks as well. In the AFC West, I told you, my homie in KC, we'll get back to them later, but of course, they had the best record in the NFL. Check. I also told you I thought the Chargers could get a wild card spot. Check again. Now, where I missed in the AFC West is I didn't think Denver would make the playoffs. I did not. And they got a wild card. To give credit where it's due, they're in. So those were my three big misses: Miami, Indy, and Denver in the AFC. Let's look at the NFC. All right. Well, I told you, Philly, fly, Eagles, fly. I told you they'd win the NFC East. I told you that them damn Cowboys were going to fall off and that they would not make the playoffs, and they did not. I told you I thought Washington could make a run, but I didn't predict them. But I saw them in my periphery, and I mentioned them as a possible wild card team. In the NFC North, well, I told you, Detroit, ding, ding, ding. I also called Green Bay. I said they'd get a wild card spot, ding, ding, ding. But here, these are probably, this is where probably my biggest miss is. I thought Chicago would play well enough to get a wild card spot. And I predicted Minnesota would come in last in that division. And so you see, that was probably my biggest miss, because not only did Chicago not get a wild card spot, they were in last. They were awful. They were the Toothless Bears. And not only that, but Minnesota, far from being last in the division, they ended up 14-3, and coming to the Palace to take on the 4-seed Rams. Looking forward to it, I tell you that. All right, let's finish it off now. In the NFC South, all right, I told you I thought Atlanta would win that division, and well, as you know now, that was wrong. Now, I told you I thought Tampa Bay could get a wild card, and well, Tampa Bay actually won the division. No wild card out of the NFC South. And then the NFC West. Well, I told you the Rams were going to win the division, didn't I? I told you. And they did. I told you them damn Niners were going to fall off, and they did. But where I was wrong, I thought the Niners would get a wild card, and they did not. In fact, the Niners came in last place in the division, so they were wrong. And so there you have it. In the NFC, I missed on Minnie and Atlanta. I missed on San Francisco and Chicago. But overall, you see, in the NFC, 3 of the 4 division winners, I called them. In the AFC, 3 of the 4 division winners, I called them. And the 2 ones I missed, both made as wild cards, and I predicted they'd be in the playoffs. And they were. So overall, I would say not a bad projection for this 2024-25 season. Now, last postseason, I went 10-3 in my predictions, okay? 10-3 in the 13 games. That includes the Super Bowl. I went 10-3. Let's set the stage now. The Chargers playing Houston. First playoff game of the weekend. Interesting. Pittsburgh at Baltimore. Denver at Buffalo. And then the NFC. Green Bay at Philly. Washington at Tampa Bay. Many at the Rams. All right. Let's take a deeper dive into the numbers, but we'll move through it with alacrity. Now, there are 14 playoff teams, as you know. 2 of them have byes. And so that means that KC and Detroit will not play this weekend. And so I want to give you an idea of how these teams stack up, the playoff teams, how they stack up in terms of their rating and rankings when we look at them exclusively. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Now, let's start with, of the teams remaining in the postseason, let's look at the top 6 offenses of the playoff qualifying teams. Top 6. And some of these made sense, and some of these were quite surprising. The number 1 offensive team, passing offensive team, by passing yards per game on average, number 1, the Detroit Lions. Put them up, the Lions. Number 2, we're talking about in the postseason now. The number 2 ranked passing offense of the teams qualified for the postseason. The number 2 ranked offense behind the Lions, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Bake Show. Okay, number 3, the Vikings are ranked number 3, 237.8 yards per game. Number 4, Baltimore, the Ravens, the Marvelous. Number 5, the LA Rams. The Rams are ranked 5th of the remaining teams, 5th in passing yards per game, 227.5. And number 6, Green Bay. And I don't know if I would have guessed that one. Let's look at rushing offense. Well, rushing offense, I want to look at all 14 of the rushing offenses because I think that is illustrative, informative, illuminative. Rushing offense. Number 1, Baltimore. Number 2, Philly. Number 3, Washington. Number 4, Tampa Bay. Number 5, Green Bay. Number 6, the Lions. Put them up. Number 7, Buffalo Bills. Number 8, Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 9, the Houston Texans. Number 10, Denver Broncos. Number 11, the Chargers. Number 12, the Vikings. Number 13, KC. And so the 14th ranked rushing offense, the last ranked offense of the 14 qualifying teams on rushing yards per game on average, is the Rams at the bottom. And so that is where I feel my concern really start to percolate. Will McWonder, Motown, backslide at the Palace and go past happiest? Or will he play hard-nosed, fundamental, power run game football? That's where the questions come in. And so of the 14 teams qualified for the postseason, the Rams have the lowest ranked rushing attack. I mean, honestly, these are not the numbers you'd expect from a guru, an offensive savant, a genius, a mastermind, is it? You've got your hand-picked quarterback. I know you say, well, that's just passing and rushing. I mean, what about scoring though? That's the key, right? It's not how many pass yards, it's not how many run yards, it's how many points. That's the key to winning, right? What about that? I got you. You know you can come here for the real. I got you. Let's look at scoring offenses, and we're just gonna look at postseason teams now. The Bills have the number one scoring offense in the postseason tournament, 30.9 points per game. Second, Baltimore, 30.5. Third, well, look, there it is again, Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers. They keep coming up, 29.5 points per game. Interesting. All right, well, what about fourth? The Commanders, Washington, 28.5 points per game. Then the Eagles, they're sixth. Then the Packers, then Minnie, then the Broncos, then the Chargers, then the Chiefs, and then the Steelers. Yes. All these teams score more than the Rams, more than the offensive guru. The Steelers outscore the Rams. The Steelers score 22.4 points per game. Well, that's 12 teams. There are 14 postseason qualifying teams. I've given you the top 12. There's only 2 left. Number 13, the Houston Texans, 21.9 points per game. The Rams are bottom, number 14 of postseason qualifying teams. They rank dead last in points scored per game at 21.6. I'm not making this up. You've seen all these games with all those field goals. Cardi's getting his work in. Cardi has been hardy, but the Rams don't score. So, I mean, you can slice it and dice it any way you want. Red zone offense, same thing, towards the bottom. Total offense, actually, the Rams rank 9th in the field of 14. So they're not at the bottom there, but the offense has been subpar all season long, with the exception of that explosion against Buffalo. But here is the saving grace. Let's look at the defense, the red zone defense. The Rams are number 5 in all of the NFL among all 32 teams. The Rams are number 5 in red zone defense. That's good. The defense has been coming on for a while now. Vikings, Minnie, they're number 18 in the NFL in red zone defense. Let's look at rushing defense. The Rams dropped to 22 in the league in rushing defense. The Vikings are number 2. They only allow 88.1 yards per game rushing defense. The Vikes do. The Rams allow 130. Saquon hurt that a lot. The Matrix ate him up. Let's look at passing defense. Well, the Rams passing defense, it's number 20 in all the league. But Minnie is even worse. Their passing defense is 28 out of 32 teams. Minnesota, they allow 242 air yards a game. The Rams allow 223 air yards per game. But don't let that lull you into a false sense of past happiness, coach. And then scoring defense. Well, the Vikings, they're number 5 in the league in scoring defense. The Rams, 17. In total defense, the Vikings, 16th in the NFL. Total defense, the Rams were 26th in total defense. So on paper, it does appear that the Vikings are a better team. I mean, they have a better record. They tend to be better in the offensive and defensive categories than the Rams do. But styles make fights, right? And I have a feeling, it's just, call me a Rams fan, but I got a feeling that the Rams have the right style to win that fight against many. And so we'll see if that in fact holds true. Very quickly, let me give out game balls from this last game. I want to give out 3 game balls on defense. I want to give out a game ball to Jake Hummel. He was the leading tackler on the day. 5 tackles solo, 3 more assisted tackles. Game ball, Jake Hummel. Game ball to, let's give one to a defensive end. Let's give one to Deshaun Johnson. 3 solo tackles, 2 assisted tackles, and a sack. Game ball, Mr. Johnson. And then finally, game ball, he's gotten one before, the defensive back, the safety, Jalen McCullough. Game ball, DB McCullough. 3 more solo tackles, 2 more assisted tackles on the day. And that young defense, the Rams' young defense, they have been recognized now as the best young defense in the NFL. They lead all defensive rookies in sacks and quarterback pressures, and so the Rams have done well on the defensive side of the ball in the draft, and so that defense is definitely coming. And congratulations to V8 Jared Verse, the Rams' only Pro Bowler. And I mean, doesn't that tell you too what you really need to know? The Rams, they don't have the talent to play wild and free and aerial attack and chuck it. They've got to play disciplined, sound, fundamental football. They've got to employ the 25-30 principle in order to successfully run deep in this postseason. And so, at this point, what I'm going to ask from you, what I need for you to do now is throw me one of these. Please like the video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. And until the next one, which won't be too long from this one, because we will be back on the other side of the Palace postseason extravaganza, Monday Night Football against many, and we will chop that one up, and hopefully we'll be preparing for the next round of the postseason. And so until then, my friends, I want to once again wish you and yours a happy new year. And here's hoping to a deep postseason run for the Rams. And so until the next one, my friends, Scotty says, one love.